What do you guys think? The point this article is trying to make. I mean, it's pretty well summed up in the title. The Matrix's male power fantasy has dated badly. We even start with, I guess, their primary concern. What does it mean when a thing dates badly?
Like, it was really great when it came out, and then like 20 years later, it's like, hey, let's not do that anymore.
It doesn't look so good.
Yeah.
For one reason or another. Okay. Sort of like, to borrow the same logic, a movie like Gone with the Wind. Especially back in the day, it was a pretty big deal. But here in 2021, certain aspects of the film will say people have problems with it. It is dated badly. Okay. Sure. Specifically, of course, the Matrix's male power fantasy. So primarily, which character are we talking about? We're talking about male power fantasy in this movie. Neo. He's the one. He's the chosen one. He can fly by the end. He's basically Superman with like extra powers, right? Like he's got all kinds of stuff going on. He can bend reality. Seems like pretty cool in terms of power fantasy. And again, we mentioned this last time. It's a couple steps up from Rocky, Die Hard. He's up here. And you made the point at the very top of class, before we realized very few people had read, that part of that power fantasy is the climb to it, right? Again, we think of Rocky, we see his training, he works really hard, doubts himself the whole way. We don't see John McClane train, but he says he has all these years of experience. He also doubts himself the whole way. Neo also doubts himself, let's make that clear, but that's also apparently part of his issue, right? The author points this out. He has to believe. Half of his battle is just, I don't know if any of you were in the same elementary school I was. There's these cat posters with like hang in there, or like you can do it. That sort of mentality. It's like if you can buy into that, man, you can jump between buildings, you can stop bullets. And you gotta like play video games for a little while. But like that's it. You're gold. What about that? What's your sense from this author? Why does he feel like that whole conceit has dated badly? What's wrong with that, according to him? Sounds pretty cool to me. I would love to play a video game for a couple hours and just kick ass. Do what? Maybe. Although he kind of makes the point, he talks about Fight Club and Office Space and the show The Office. Part of the point he makes in there is that in 1999 and 2000, I sound like an old school rap album, a lot of them did that. I went back to middle school there, sorry. I lost my train. Juvenile's who I'm thinking of. Anyway, where were we? I just had back that ass in my head, I'm sorry.
You were talking about Office Space.
Thank you. He makes the point that a lot of these other movies do this same sort of thing. Now, these guys don't fly, but they all, again, according to the author, engage in the same sort of office mayhem. Like the gist seems to be, and we've talked about this in super high-minded terms before now. We talked about capital A authority, right? And autonomy, and how the two can't really coexist. We looked at the scene where Neo meets with his boss when he's late that day, right? His boss like kind of cuts him down to size, and Neo is very like, yes sir, I'm sorry. You know, we've all been there in one way or another. You don't have a lot of autonomy in those moments, right? You don't have a lot of say in what you do in those moments. Unless you maybe don't give a shit about the job, I suppose. But this article seems to want to take that idea of authority and autonomy and say, well, what are they talking about in terms of the real world? Just a cubicle job, right? That is what he does. We see him in his job, and we remarked upon this too. What is he doing when we see him in his cubicle? Nothing. He's doing nothing. His computer's not even on. He's just sitting there. But apparently that's worth rebelling against, according to the film, right? Now, 2 questions for you. The first, you don't even really have to have read, although, Jesus Christ, I hope you have. I just gave you like X amount of minutes to do it. Why might that be worth rebelling against? Sitting in a cubicle all day, essentially doing nothing, but then of course in the scene we looked at, literally doing nothing. Why would that be worth rebelling against, do you think?
Feel kind of caged.
Okay, how so?
Because like you're in a tight spot, just kind of working for something else that you really don't see your own working with.
Okay, it's mundane, but in a hellish way, right? I think, and this is going to get us to the second question, but I do wonder if part of what the author is talking about is a little unfair. Like, it does seem awful, working in a cubicle all day. I spend my office hours, I spend my break in a cubicle. It kind of sucks. But I'm not there all day. It's the same tight walls. No one talking to you. You're doing some shitty whatever. Who cares what it is? Might as well be nothing, that scene might suggest, right? When the computer's not even on. You don't see the value of your work. You don't see what it produces, maybe. And you're just going to do that until when? Maybe you get promoted? Or you die? Or something? That sounds pretty terrible. Like in a boring way. Like it's not very exciting. So I think sometimes it's hard for us to consider that that would be worth rebelling against. But again, in 1999, according to this film, Office Space, Fight Club, it is. We're worth more than that, the film seems to suggest, right? And again, I would contend to this author that that's part of the power fantasy. Could we argue it goes too far in The Matrix? Sure. But at its heart, if we're being as fair as we can, I think there is still some value in it. And the whole thing about work sucks, he kind of like sneers at that in the article. It does. That's why that slogan works. You read that and you're like, oh fuck yeah, oh yeah. I feel this guy. Work sucks. Yeah, that's a human thing. And I think you put it really well. You said caged, I think. And again, we're back to that question of authority and autonomy, right? Just because you put it in really boring terms doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. Doesn't mean it's not human, okay? I wanted to make that point. Now, the second question, of course, and this gets more to what the article is saying, he feels like even that aspect, that we're rebelling against office life, cubicle life, has dated badly. Did you guys pick up on why that is? He lists reasons. I think it's toward the end, maybe. He gives all these reasons on why that's really not a big deal, basically. Like, part of this guy's thesis is like, actually, that's not worth rebelling against, because all these other problems are way worse, basically. Happens in several places, as a matter of fact. I'll give you one. He talks about 9/11. That was kind of a big deal. This is the 2 years after this movie came out. You guys recall anything else? Or, I'll put it to you this way. Is there anything you worry about right now more than work sucking? Are there any bigger problems in the world? Like what? Let's name a couple.
COVID.
Yeah. Sure? Let's do a couple more. This will be fun. We'll bum this all out.
Graduating, getting a job.
Well, that's bending. This guy would say, you're not thinking big enough. Your perspective has dated badly, according to Nicholas Barber. We're not going to make movies about that. That's not. You need to have higher-minded ideals. He talks about the environment. We're fucking that up every day, right? Terrorism, the Middle East. He mentions China's killing fucking millions of Muslims just because that's what they do over there, apparently. There's some big problems. And part of his point is, here in 2021, I think we could easily say we're more aware of those problems, just as a society, right? And I guess because of that, according to this guy, we would look back on a film like The Matrix and say, oh, they had it so easy if that's what they were worried about. Maybe they did. Maybe that's part of the power fantasy too. What's your biggest concern right now? Is it the environment? For most of you, probably not. Not really. I'm not saying you don't care. But yeah, it's probably closer to home, right? Am I going to graduate? The fuck am I going to do after that, right? These are human concerns. So here's my point. In the very first paragraph, this guy says, again, this is essentially his thesis, right? The Matrix has dated so badly that it now seems to be a relic. It's a film that, like the human race in the Wachowski story, those are the people that made the film, is trapped forever in the 90s. Here's my counterpoint to that. That's how art works. It is a relic of the 90s because that's when it was made. Like if you have a car, like a 95 Taurus, damn, that car's a relic. Yeah, that's how they made cars in 95. Like most of it's still metal and weird stuff like that, you know? Yeah. That's how we learn about the year it was made. They don't know about the future. He brings up 9/11. Bitch, these are not time travelers. Right? That's not fair to the movie. So again, my counterpoint is, you can not like it for these reasons. I'm not taking that away from anybody. But that is how art works. Movies you like right now in 2021, because maybe they're super topical. 20 years from now, probably not so much, right? That's how it works. That's art. We can think about what they must have thought about in 1999 as a result of this. And what power fantasies they really valued. What they wanted to be. And I think there's one more inherent issue that we all might have with Neo, with the Matrix, with how these people work. What's the problem? If we could put a name to it, with this power fantasy. Because I don't think it's just the fact that they can't tell the future, right? With like 9/11 and all that stuff. This guy mentions that Neo doesn't do anything, right? He plays video games for like 10 hours, and they're all impressed. Dude's like a machine. It's like a piece. Let me share with you guys real quick. I played video games for 10 hours.
Dude, you're like a machine.
I know.
Slow down.
Actually, in high school, no lie, I had a thing, because you don't sleep when you're a teenager. I would start in the floor, and then I'd get some pillows up on the coffee table that was about this high for my neck, and I would just spin all night. I beat Final Fantasy VII in 2 days doing that.
When I got my little key cut out.
Sure, same thing. Why is that ridiculous? I'm telling you I understand that it is. Why is that ridiculous? Final Fantasy VII is an RPG that takes like 30 or 40 hours to beat. I did it in 2 days. What's the problem with that statement?
Played a lot of video games.
Probably. What's up?
48 hours in 2 days, so slept for like 8.
Something, yeah. Maybe I should like go outside or talk to my parents or do anything worthwhile. Seems like a waste of time, doesn't it? But again, by the logic of the film, he's like a machine. Look at this guy go. And then, of course, as a result of that machine-like grinding, I think you gave us the term last time, which is a term that we have now, he ends up with all these abilities, right? We go ahead and call them powers. What's the problem with that? Looks cool.
Like, he didn't work for it.
Work for it how?
Like, I mean, you could argue he did because, like, to us, what we see is he plugs himself into
It just kinda does this
Nintendo 64 cartridge.
for a lot.
and
Yeah.
does that.
Yeah.
But to him, he's like learning kung fu from like some dude in the mountains or something.
He's doing it mentally.
Yeah, he's doing it mentally.
Like I say, he worked for it mentally, not
Yeah.
physically.
Good. This is an important distinction. That this guy makes, he implies it, but it's interesting to me, and I don't think he'd be alone in this. Mental work doesn't have the same cachet, right? You put in the physical work, you run up some stairs, you run over broken glass, right? You experience physical pain to get where you're going. We value that more in this particular genre, at least. I can't speak to all of them. We're just talking about action movies. But we value that more, it seems like, than mental work.
Yeah, because you can see it happen. Feels like we got robbed in the Matrix when
We didn't see his mental training montage.
They're just like twitching.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
He's doing it. Can't see it.
Yeah. That's interesting too. There's an element of like privacy there almost. Like it's a personal training that we don't get to participate in. Again, all of this says some things about us, I think, rather than the film. But that's interesting. But to bring it back home, I think to again be a little more diplomatic to the film, because this guy seems to want to shit on it. Again, that's fine. Part of it, by the way, this is a relic of 2021. I think 20 years from now, people are going to look back and say, "Did they just hate everything? Did they just shit on everything?" And it's like, yeah, we kind of did. Everything you read is in this tone, right? I can't actually know if he doesn't like the movie. He's like, nah, I just knew that people would click on it, right? Like that, it got published because of that tone problem. Like that's a weird relic of our time. We're not immune to this either. But anyway, part of the power fantasy isn't just not having to work physically very hard, and then in the end, just being a complete, like, godlike figure digitally, right? Those are big parts of it. But another part of it, I think, is privileging mental work over physical. And again, it's strange to me that all the way here in 2021, I think we still have a problem with that, right? At least in this genre. Again, maybe in a different genre, we would read it a different way, but in an action movie, something about it, I mean, disagree with me, please, but like, is it something about the genre is like so primal or something that we need to see cavemen run around bonking each other? Like, why? You know what I'm saying? Like, does any of that make any sense to anybody? Because you would think in 2021, we're like, oh yeah, it's a thinking man's training. You know, it's about what's in your mind, not in your, you know, your body. But we still have an issue with that, I think. No thoughts on that. Well, I like this. To bring it back home, when it comes to this paper, okay, because that's what I want to finally focus with you guys on. We were going to look at a scene. We're not going to do that. I think I would just lose you guys further at this point. For this paper, I think I've decided, and I want to talk to you about this. That's a two-way street. I think the question I want you guys to consider, because again, we mentioned last time, maybe even the time before that, what this paper ultimately is not even an in-class essay. This is like an essay question you would answer on a test, right? It's like that. So we got a good bit of time to figure that out. That's kind of short, right? To me, the best question I could think of is something like, and I want to get the phrasing right because their phrasing was very careful on the prompt. Hang on. Okay. How good a job does the Matrix do in conveying or displaying a late 90s power fantasy? Something like that. What do you guys think? I'm honestly asking for your input.
What about power fantasies, just like in general?
Well, I mean, here again, like the difficulty there, I mean, in some ways, sure, it does do that, for sure. But at the same time, if you're going to talk about any element of the film, I think you'd have to get specific to the 90s, because like, the way we talked about Rocky is Rocky, Die Hard, and The Matrix are all power fantasies. Most action movies are. Like, that's why you like them. I grew up on Van Damme. A big part of that was like, my dad thought he was awesome because like he wanted to be Van Damme. You know what I'm saying? Like that. So Rocky's a 70s power fantasy. How do you know? Because he doesn't actually win in the end. That's the best you could hope for in the 70s. In the 80s, he wins. He comes out real ragged, but he wins. Like that you can see the imprint of the 70s on Die Hard, right? You can win, but you don't come out without scars, right? That sort of thing.
I think the only difference from this, you can't put yourself in that position. There's no emotional connection. Like Rocky, you have the people in the world like, yo, I actually want to work, like I actually want to be like a day-to-day person, and then finally, come out on top. Then, Die Hard, anybody can be a cop, but who can, like just go in virtual reality and like, oh, I'm a hero.
Yeah.
So, like, that's why I haven't been saying nothing, because when I compare the two,
Yeah.
it's not interesting to me. Literally lay there and learn how to train.
Yeah. Well, that in and of itself is interesting to me. I mean, that's a fair point. I wonder then too, and again, I'm asking, I'm not telling you guys, I'm asking. Is part of the power fantasy here maybe something like to be so powerful and to perhaps get there in such a way that we find as a viewer unsatisfying, that you don't give a shit about relating to people? Do you know what I mean? Does that make any sense? Like, I'll put it in a context we've talked about before, especially with Rocky. Is it, like, if you take the American dream to the nth degree, like as far as it can go, isn't part of that like, I'm gonna live in a house on a hill and not be fucked with by anybody? Like, isn't that the weird sort of upper? I wonder if that's tied into it somehow, because it feels similar to me. I like that. I mean, I've never even considered if I relate to the Matrix when I watch it. The whole time I'm just like, Jesus, this is crazy. I mean, it doesn't affect me emotionally like Rocky does. I know I'm sap for saying that.
Rocky kind of makes like shadow box and stuff. So.
Do what?
I said Rocky, like, I watched that movie, I just feel it's like shadow box.
I'm saying it pulls on you. It does.
Makes me want to start going to the gym.
It moves you in here.
More people could relate and be like, I want to do that. Like be a boxer or something. I want to be like that kind of cop that saves the day, and not many people think about getting put into like a virtual reality world.
Well, but again, weirdly, you would think more and more these days that would like be easier to relate to,
Yeah, actually, it probably is way easier nowadays.
Than in '99.
Yeah, then especially in '99.
Yeah.
I mean, technology-wise, I feel like entertainment-wise,
Yeah.
we're over it, because that little generation like burnt it out with that, with Space Age or Space Jam and all that. So like it kind of over like virtual reality and that type of thing. So I feel like.
I've never heard anyone link the Matrix to Space Jam before.
No, kind of like virtual reality.
No. I mean, I'm trying real hard to chew on it. Because now you're fucking with my childhood. It's all good. In like otherworldly, that might come back to the article. The author's big problem is we here in 2020, when I think it might have been published, but 2021 now, we know so much more about the world, like on a general scale. I think we fool ourselves sometimes into telling ourselves we know more than we do, but like in general, we know more about what's going on. And thus, maybe we feel like whatever entertainment we engage in should also share that awareness, right? Maybe that's part of how we relate to it. So even in something like Rocky, it's from the 70s. I mean, he doesn't know about 9/11 either, any of that stuff. But it's, among other things, that movie has a lot to say about class. And that's something, especially in 2021, we're all super aware of, right? So maybe that's a foothold. Similarly in Die Hard, actually, I think it's a little bit about class. Because John McClane, he's more middle class, but like he's lower middle class. He's not, you know. Then you get to The Matrix, dude works in an office job. Again, the article kind of points out, a lot of us would be low-key thrilled to get a job like that. You're like, I'm gonna get paid right now? Where do I sign up? Why is this guy complaining? So, yeah. So again, all that super roundabout way of saying, I think we have to call it a 90s power fantasy. Specifically, like I don't think people in the 70s or the 80s would have gotten it. Seems like people here post 2020 don't really get it, right? I think you have to say, right at the end of the 20th century, like this guy does, that's what those people were feeling. That's what those people were worried about. Because in some ways, I think, I was 13 when it came out, I think that's all people had to worry about.
Was it the world was a simulation?
No. Well, look, I put it this way in my notes. Now I get back to my notes now. Our big issue, and we never said the word, but I think this is the issue. Basically, Neo's problem, and Trinity has this problem, Morpheus has it, they all have this problem. They're the gripes of the privileged.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No,
They said that in the article. They said that.
I'm saying, exactly. That's this guy's big problem. Their lives are so good, they don't realize how good they have it, is what he's kind of getting at, right? From our perspective. Maybe so, right? But again, my point would be, you can't know what you don't know. So here in 1999, if you want to call it privilege in a way, they don't know that. You see what I'm saying? So the other question I had is, how are they privileged? Like, what allows them to be privileged? Because I think that's pretty key to the film. What allows them to not worry about this other stuff? Because again, we've been fucking with the environment forever. Middle East has been doing the Middle East forever. What allows them to not worry about that stuff, do you think? It's gotta be in the movie. It's gotta be something. I'll put it to you this way. What allows Neo, and then to a lesser extent, by the way, real quick, this guy says male power fantasy. Yes, because Neo's the main character. Trinity's a bad motherfucker too. Like, the scene we were gonna watch that I decided we're not, because I think this is going better, when they tear up the office building to get Morpheus back. Trinity does pretty okay.
Yeah, I like that scene.
I know it's really cool, but it's also kind of problematic because they're killing a lot of innocent people.
It's probably the best scene.
Yeah, but again, they blow away a lot of innocent folks. But they look damn cool doing it. So that's But anyway, what allows them to do that? Like, Neo's the one, okay, Trinity's not. So what allows her to do that? There's a little bit of a power fantasy going on for her too. How does she get to that point? A lot of push-ups on the ship, is that? Come on, you know how she does it.
A lot of time. It's just not
With-
that.
She did the simulator too. That's all. They show you when he's like, "Can you fly that helicopter?" And she's like, "Hang on." Yep, now I can. They all. So what allows them their abilities, again, and I try to present this in a way you guys won't laugh at it. In 1999, the internet was magic. It just was. It didn't exist before. So there was this idea that, like, I could learn anything virtually. I look it up. I'll become a plumber. I don't know. I can learn anything I want online. That was the idea. And that's still kind of the idea, but again, we do different things with it now. I think that's at the heart of the film. I think that's why it's so 90s. But I think that's why it's such a departure from Rocky and Die Hard. They'd be like, what is the internet? What are you talking about? But it's weird to me, because I think we can, but I think we have to try to argue why the internet and like all the knowledge it brings, potential knowledge it brings, why that on the one hand allows these guys their abilities, right? Their power fantasy. But at the same time, it gets in their way in terms of privilege. I went out kind of deep. I want to know if you guys can come with me. Feels like it now. Go for it.
So why are they considered like the privileged? If
Who?
they're like Neo,
Okay.
like why are they considered the privileged ones? If they're the ones that, I mean, they're out of the loop or whatnot, but
Yeah.
they're still finding other stuff, and other people don't even know about it. They can live their own normal lives.
Okay. Well, I mean, this article argues they're privileged because this article says they're concerned with what they're concerned with. Which again, ultimately he says is just like work sucks, is like what the movie is about. Which again is quite possible. But that if that's your main concern, that's a marker of privilege because you should be concerned about much bigger issues in the world. I guess for the people in the Matrix, maybe they're even less privileged because they don't know that they're being shot to death for something they can't control, right? But they're not worried about that stuff either. Again, no one in the movie is like, man, we should really think about the environment. Like that never comes up, according to this person. I guess what I'm asking, I'm trying to think of a roundabout way to get you guys there with me. And I think part of my issue is I was there and you weren't. But what does it look like when you're online? Again, theoretically, you have access to the world. You could go pretty much anywhere. You could find out anything. Is that what we do with the internet? Do we learn stuff? Sometimes. What do we do the rest of the time? Do we inform ourselves about the world? What do we do? Play games? What'd you say? Entertainment? Yeah.
Flights.
Do what now?
Flights.
Flights? Oh, that's like a new thing on Twitter or something, right?
No, like airport, like flights.
Oh, book flights.
Yeah, like business.
Yeah. Mundane, individual tasks. I want to be entertained. I got to do this next week. I'm going to post on this message board about how much I hate this thing. Or like it's a lot of individualized stuff. You just chase whatever it is you want. And it's much less of the utopian, look at the world. Again, that's how it was presented back in the day. Only now do we understand much more fully, I think, that while you're still able to do that, we don't. I don't do that. I'm not gonna lie to you.
I feel like when it first came out, like when you first get access to the internet, it's more like that. Like a little bit.
The first thing I did, I think I was 11 when we got the internet, which would have been 97. We're kind of ahead of the curve, I'm not gonna lie to you. I think within the first 2 or 3 weeks of having it, I got suspended from a message board for cursing somebody out. And the only reason I did it was because I could. Because I was 11 and you can't do that most of the other time. Can't walk on the street 11-year-old be like, hey, fuck you. Like, did you guys hear what this guy just said? Is no one gonna do something? But again, my point is, that was the dream then. I think that dream is alive in the Matrix. Every time somebody like Trinity is like, hold on, I'll figure it out. Like, I can do it now. That's the dream. That we would one day come to a world, technology would catch up to this idea where you could just learn stuff. It's all about the mental game now, here in 1999. Physical game's gone. Yeah.
I mean, like, I think it's a pretty heavy power fantasy because
Yeah.
fantasy is in the word. So it's just kind of like people identify themselves with heroes or with chosen ones or
Yeah.
with gods and things like that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, hold on, sorry. But
You're good.
like he kind of went into this whole thing, created this whole life, became this whole person, and although it was all mental, like the premise of what he said is at the end is that the possibilities are endless. So it's kind of like even though I was a nobody, I still was curious enough to go and try and figure out what was going on. I had to believe enough. I had to become somebody. So it's just kind of like, even though I didn't have to work as hard, you know, I still
Physically.
had to do, I still had to do something. I still had to do my research. I still had to ask questions.
Yeah.
I still had to go through this whole thing to like figure it all out. And that's kind of like you said, a 90s thing that's what everybody's doing in the 90s. Like y'all were more privileged in the 90s than people were in the 70s. So
Yeah.
everybody had privilege, and just kind of like that you guys have access to this other world, you know, in this movie they kind of just made it the Matrix, you know, like what can you find out through this thing, what can I research, what can I look up, how can I save the world, can I find this cure on the internet?
Well, and if you take the power fantasy far enough, it does turn into like what borderline superhuman ability am I gonna anoint myself with a Google search, you know? By the way, when the internet first came out, Google wasn't even a thing. It was like, what search engine do you use? Oh, I use Dogpile. That was one. Anyway. Yeah. So, okay, so here again, just to recap, because we're going to close it down here in a second. I think, again, the question I want to ask you guys is like, I put it a little more succinctly now. Hang on. So that's what I want you to think about a little bit over the weekend. We'll talk about it more. We may actually even look at parts of the film. But I want to hash this out with you guys. You're going to have to talk about technology. You're going to have to, and again, I worry every time I say it because I know I sound dumb to you guys. You got to at least in some way try to appreciate the fact that the internet was magic. It just was. It was so new, so impossible to even imagine it before it ended up in your house. You're like, wait, what can I do with this? Wild. And if that gets introduced into your life, you barely understand this thing, what's possible? I don't know. Maybe something like the Matrix, if you take it into the realm of fantasy. That's what I want to talk about going forward. We'll focus more on how to make this into a paper next time as well. Because I'm still grappling with the 3-paragraph limit. I'm still a little bit upset about that, if I'm being honest with you. I have a way we can do it. I'm just not happy about it. Questions about anything we've talked about today? Thoughts, confusions? Because I feel like we got to a good place here at the end, but I still, if anybody's not there with us, I would love to hear about it. You guys. Okay. For next time, you guys posted your discussion posts. I have not looked at them yet because I don't know how I would have. I teach all day. I want you to respond to each other. In those responses, again, I told you for this assignment, you can kind of just talk about whatever you want. That's true. I think you could go one of two ways in your responses to each other. You could either just talk to them about whatever argument they're making on their own terms. That's fine, okay? But I would also at least consider, when you're reading your classmates' work, whatever they're talking about, do you see any opportunities to shift toward this question, even a little bit? Be like, hey, you pointed out this scene, or hey, you're kind of talking about this one thing. That seems like that would also work to start answering this question if you thought about that, and here's why. Next week, basically, I really want to start the process of, let's do the boring work and answer the damn prompt that somebody gave us. Sound good? All right. I'll see you guys Monday. Thank you.